Social media platforms are increasingly the place Americans go to express their views, debate issues, and gather news and information. These platforms are the virtual town square. However, many social media platforms are under the control of people who are hostile to the fundamental American principles of free speech and expression protected in the U.S. Constitution. We've witnessed big tech autocrats wield their unchecked power to suppress the speech of Americans to promote their preferred political opinions. Twitter was once one of these platforms until Elon Musk purchased the company a few months ago. Mr. Musk has pledged to end censorship that goes beyond the law. He has pledged to allow Americans' voices be heard, not quashed. In this hearing, we will examine the actions taken by Twitter prior to Mr. Musk's ownership. Many of these actions were carried out by the witnesses before us today. Twitter aggressively suppressed conservative elected officials, journalists, and activists. This includes shadow banning, locking accounts, and banning accounts altogether. Twitter's previous management team deplatformed and suppressed not just conservative voices, but anyone whose opinion strayed from what they deemed acceptable. It worked hand in hand with the FBI to monitor the protected speech of Americans, receiving millions of tax dollars to do so. Twitter, under the leadership of our witnesses today, was a private company the federal government used to accomplish what it constitutionally cannot: limit the free exercise of speech. We also know that one of the witnesses before us today participated in an Aspen Institute exercise in September 2020 on a potential hack and dump operation related to Hunter Biden. Other big tech companies and reporters attended as well. This exercise prepared them for their future collusion to suppress and delegitimize information contained in Hunter Biden's laptop about the Biden's family business schemes. On October 14, 2020, the New York Post published its first story based on information contained in Hunter Biden's laptop. The Post provided proof of the laptop's legitimacy by releasing a computer repair store's signed receipt for the laptop and the federal subpoena used by the FBI to retrieve it in 2019. The article revealed that a top executive at Burisma, who was paying Hunter Biden $50,000 a month, had spent time with then Vice President Biden in Washington, D.C. Throughout his presidential campaign, Joe Biden assured the American people that he had never spoken to his son about his overseas business dealing. However, the details exposed in the Post article indicate that Joe Biden lied to the American people. Immediately following the story's publication, America witnessed a coordinated campaign by social media companies, mainstream news, and the intelligence community to suppress and delegitimize the existence of Hunter Biden's laptop and its contents. That morning, Twitter and other social media companies took extraordinary steps to suppress that story. Twitter immediately removed the story and banned the New York Post account. Twitter also banned accounts who shared the story, including White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, and blocked its transmission via direct message. This episode marked the first time Twitter directly limited the spread of information from a mainstream news organization, and the New York Post would not get its account back for 2 weeks. Twitter would finally admit its mistake, but the damage had already been done. On October 19th, 51 former intelligence officials published a letter that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation, which Joe Biden used as a talking point at a presidential debate on October 22nd.
There was a coordinated campaign to suppress the New York Post, one of the 5 largest newspapers in the United States, and those who shared the story, including me. I was White House press secretary at the time. I shared it on my personal account. They blocked my personal account and would not unblock it until I took down the story. But what makes this galling is to think, and I'm so glad James Comer is asking these questions, the FBI, while we are in office, the Trump administration is having weekly meetings with social media companies. Not only that, they reportedly warned of a hack and leak operation against Hunter Biden. So imagine that, someone who is in the executive branch working, myself, and the FBI, same federal government, going behind the scenes, potentially coordinating with social media companies to suppress the voice of the American people as embodied in the executive branch. It is appalling.
I want to make sure the American people truly understand the timeline here because it's very important. The Hunter Biden laptop story was published on Wednesday. Twitter did not acknowledge their mistake for at least 24 hours. Then on Monday morning, 51 former intelligence officials published their letter. That letter was then wholeheartedly accepted by mainstream news as proof that the laptop was fake. Joe Biden used that letter to brush aside the few questions he received about the story. During that time, the mainstream media was more concerned about what flavor of ice cream Joe Biden had ordered on a particular day. All this happened 2 weeks before the 2020 election. One survey found that 17% of Biden voters would not have voted for the Biden-Harris ticket if they'd known about the Biden laptop. But many Americans did not know about it because of a coordinated cover-up by big tech, the swamp, and mainstream news. Now mainstream media outlets have verified the laptop, but the damage has been done. Today we are joined by 3 former high-ranking employees at Twitter: Vijaya Gadde, Twitter's former top lawyer; James Baker, Twitter's former deputy general counsel; and Yoel Roth, Twitter's former head of trust and safety. We are also joined by Annika Collier-Navaroli, a former Twitter member of U.S. safety policy team. Let me get that right. I would like to thank you all for your participation in today's hearing. We owe it to the American people to provide answers about this collusion to censor information about Joe Biden's involvement in his family's business schemes.
With the impending explosion against our police and against Congress on January 6th.
Are matters that require real investigation and reflection. Rather than conspiring to suppress right-wing MAGA speech, as my colleagues astonishingly claim, Twitter and other media companies knowingly facilitated Trump's spread of disinformation, or what his own sycophantic Attorney General William Barr would come to call bullshit, and gave voice to his followers' glorification of violence and calls for civil war.
Have you communicated with government officials ever on a platform called JIRA? Yes or no? Real quick answer. We're on the clock.
Not
yes
to
or
the
no?
best of my recollection.
Not to
no.
your recollection? Great. If you did, in the event, communicate, who would have had access to this platform?
That's the nature of my confusion.
Okay.
JIRA
Did you ever speak to government officials on JIRA regarding taking down social media posts?
Again, not to the best of my recollection.
Can you explain to me why the federal government would ever have interest in communicating through JIRA, mind you, a private cloud server, with social media companies without oversight to censor American voices? I want to let you know that this is a violation of the First Amendment, and the federal government is colluding with social media companies to censor Americans. Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to submit these graphics into record. And Mr. Roth, I'm going to refresh your memory for you. This flowchart behind me. Thank you, Chair. This flowchart shows the following federal agencies, social media companies, Twitter, leftist nonprofits, and organizations communicating regarding their version of misinformation using JIRA, a private cloud server. On this chart, I want to annotate that the Department of Homeland Security, which has the following branches: Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA, Countering Foreign Intelligence Task Force, now known as the Misinfo, Disinfo, and Malinformation, MDM. This was, again, used against the American people. The Election Partnership Institute, or Election Integrity Partnership, EIP, which includes the following: Stanford Internet Observatory, University of Washington Center for Informed Public, Graphica, and Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, and potentially, according to what we found on the final report by EIP, the DNC. The Center for Internet Security, CIS, a nonprofit funded by DHS, the National Association of Secretaries of State, also known as NASS, and the National Association of State Election Directors, NASED, and in this case, because there are other social media companies involved, Twitter. What do all of these groups, though, have in common? And I'm going to, again, refresh your memory. They were all communicating on a private cloud server known as JIRA. Now, the screenshot behind me, which is an example of one of thousands, shows on November 3rd, 2020, that you, Mr. Roth, a Twitter employee, were exchanging communications on JIRA, a private cloud server, with CISA, NASS, NASED, and Alex Stamos, who now works at Stanford and is a former security officer at Facebook, to remove a posting. Do you now remember communicating on a private cloud server to remove a posting? Yes or no?
I wouldn't agree with the characterization.
I don't care if you agree. This is your stuff. Yes or no, did you communicate with a private entity, the government agency, on a private cloud server? Yes or no?
The question was if I
Yes or no? Yeah, I'm on time. Yes or no?
Ma'am, I don't believe I can give you a yes or no.
Well, I'm going to tell you right now that you did, and we have proof of it. This, ladies and gentlemen, is joint action between the federal government and a private company to censor and violate the First Amendment. This is also known, and I'm so glad that there's many attorneys on this panel, joint state actors. It's highly illegal. You are all engaged in this action, and I want you to know that you will be all held accountable. Ms. Gaddy, are you still on CISA's Cybersecurity Advisory Council? Yes or no?
Yes, I am.
Okay. For those who have said that this is a pointless hearing, and I just want to let you guys all know, we found that Twitter was indeed communicating with the federal government to censor Americans. I'd like to remind you that this was all in place before January 6th. So to say that these mechanisms weren't in place and to make it about January 6th, I want to let you know that you guys were actually in control of all of the content, and clearly we have proof of that. Now, if you don't think that this is important to your constituents and the American people from those saying that this was a pointless hearing, I suggest you find other jobs. Chairman, I yield my time.
They knew it was leaking. They knew it would hurt the Biden campaign. So the FBI used its relationship with Twitter to suppress criminal evidence being revealed about Joe Biden 1 month before the 2020 elections. You, ladies and gentlemen, interfered with the United States of America 2020 presidential election, knowingly and willingly. That's the bad news. It's going to get worse because this is the investigation part. Later comes the arrest part. Your attorneys are familiar with that. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to spend 5 hours with these ladies and gentlemen during depositions surely yet to come.
And the Media Research Center polled Democratic voters in 2020 swing states and found that 17% would have changed their vote if they had known the contents and evidence of the New York Post story. President Trump lost key states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Wisconsin, by collectively just over 100,000 votes. And if this is accurate, this poll, 3.2 million votes could have swung. And he only needed a teeny fraction of those 3.2 million. That decision almost certainly changed the result of the 2020 presidential election.
You aware that Hunter Biden's lawyers, as recently as last week, wrote the Department of Justice about Hunter Biden's laptop?
I've seen some articles about that.
Yes, they did. And it appears that Hunter Biden's attorney is admitting that the laptop and emails on it are authentic. So, Ms. Gaddy, on October 14, 2020, did Hunter Biden report to Twitter that he was the victim of a hack?
No, I don't believe he did.
Ms. Gaddy, when the New York Post initially broke the story about the laptop, did you call Hunter Biden's lawyer to ask if it was authentic?
No, I did not.
Isn't it correct that the Biden campaign had contact with Twitter in the run-up to the 2020 election?
Not to my knowledge.
And you're telling this committee that you didn't ask any Biden representative if the laptop was real or for Hunter Biden's attorney's phone number to confirm its authenticity?
We did not speak to anybody related to that.
Mr. Baker, are you aware that the FBI had Hunter Biden's laptop since December of 2019?
I'm sorry, am I aware of that now?
Well, were you aware then?
Then, no, I don't believe, sir, that to the best of my recollection, I don't think I knew.
But you're aware now?
I've heard that now, yes.
Mr. Baker, did you call any of your contacts at the FBI to ask whether or not they knew if the material had been hacked?
I don't recall contacting them about that on that day.
Mr. Roth, Ms. Gaddy, and Mr. Baker, it appears to me that you failed at your jobs. You were entrusted with the highest level of power at Twitter, but when you were faced with the New York Post story, instead of allowing people to judge the information for themselves, you rushed to find a reason why the American people shouldn't see it. I can assure you this committee will succeed in holding the Bidens accountable. So much of the evidence of wrongdoing from this family is located in that hard drive that you all led the American people to believe was Russian disinformation, when in fact it was not.
The Twitter files, I would note first and foremost, didn't just affect me, but affected much more junior employees at Twitter. Employees as far away as Manila in the Philippines were doxxed, had their families threatened, and experienced harm equal to or greater than what I've experienced. But concurrent with the Twitter files, Elon Musk also made the decision to share a defamatory allegation that I support or condone pedophilia. And this lie led directly to a wave of homophobic and anti-Semitic threats and harassment against me, of which Twitter has removed vanishingly little. And following the Daily Mail's decision to publish where I live, ultimately I had to leave my home and sell it. Those are the consequences for this type of online harassment and speech.
It's amazing to me, Mr. Roth, as the head and trust of safety at Twitter, your ability, or should I say inability, to remove child porn. Now, here's something that disgusts me about you. In your doctoral dissertation entitled Gay Data, you argued that minors should have access to Grindr, an adult male gay hookup app. Minors? Really? You know, Elon Musk took over Twitter and he banned 44,000 accounts that were promoting child porn. You permanently banned my Twitter account, but you allowed child porn all over Twitter. Twitter had become a platform, you said, connecting queer young adults. You also wrote on Twitter in 2010, can high school students ever meaningfully consent to sex with their teachers? In 2021, while you were the director of trust and safety on Twitter, an underage boy and his mother announced a lawsuit against Twitter because Twitter was benefiting from and refused to remove a lewd video featuring this boy and another minor. That is repulsive. But you violated me. What were my tweets? Okay, let's talk about them. I was talking about the deaths being reported on VAERS. By the way, that's on the CDC website. I was also saying that I didn't think any entity should enforce a non-FDA approved vaccine or mask. Guess what? A lot of people agreed with me, but you called that COVID misinformation. By the way, I'm a member of Congress and you're not. I also said the controversial COVID-19 vaccines should not be forced on our military. You want to know something? Republicans stopped that in the NDAA. January 2nd, 2002, you permanently banned my Twitter account. This was the account that I would put my campaign ads on, raise money on, fight back when attacked with lies, and be able to talk to my voters in my district. But you banned it. And then let me explain. My account was not reinstated until November 21st, 2022. That was after my election on November 8th. You know, at your company, or your former company where you worked, Twitter employees, over 98% of them donate to Democrats. So while you coordinated with DHS, the FBI, the CIA, our government, and outside groups to permanently shadow ban conservative Americans and candidates like me and the former president of the United States, President Donald J. Trump, you were censoring and wrongfully violating our First Amendment free speech rights. Guess what? None of you hold security clearances. None of you are elected, and none of you represent 750,000 people like I do. Let's explain. 52 United States Law 10101. No person shall intimidate, threaten, coerce, or attempt to stop any other person for the purpose of interfering with their rights to vote or to vote as he may choose. You didn't shadow ban or permanently ban my Democrat opponent. No, you did that to me. You see, not only that, was it me that you violated my First Amendment rights, you violated countless conservative Americans. These were doctors that were trying to tell the truth about COVID, doctors that were having success treating people with ivermectin that you all would not allow to be talked about on your platform. These were parents complaining about their school boards, teaching gender lies in their schools, biological males entering their daughters' bathrooms and sports. These were also people questioning the 2020 election, and guess what? That's Americans' First Amendment right. These were people talking about voting machines. You know what? Democrats did that in 2019, before the 2020 election. On Twitter, people could question elections such as 2016, saying Hillary won, but in 2020, no one could question elections saying Trump won. You abuse the power of a large corporation, big tech, to censor Americans.
On October 14, 2020, Twitter blocks the New York Post story on the Hunter Biden, and suspends their account. the night before, FBI Special Agent Elvis Chan sends you an email. The email says this: heads up, I will be sending a teleporter link for you to download 10 documents. It's not spam. Please confirm receipt when you get it. 2 minutes later, 6:24 p.m., you respond back, received and downloaded, thanks. What were those 10 documents?
Twitter didn't give me access to my laptop, but Special Agent Chan has said publicly, and the FBI has confirmed, that those documents did not relate to Hunter Biden, and that's my recollection of them.
What did they relate to?
My interactions with Agent Chan and with the FBI almost entirely focused on what the FBI called malign foreign interference, things like Russian troll farms and Iranian involvement in the elections, not on any type of domestic
Any of the
activity.
information on there classified?
No, sir, I do not hold a security clearance, and so I would not have received any classified information.
Who does hold a security clearance? I'll just go to the second email here. I'm just curious about this. What I propose is that 30 days out from the election, this is another email to you from Mr. Chan. 30 days, we get temporary clearances. You pick who they are. Who were the people at Twitter who had a security clearance?
To be honest, sir, I'm not sure, and we never ultimately followed through on this plan to get temporary clearances.
Did anyone at Twitter have a security clearance?
It's my understanding that at least some current or former employees did hold clearances, but I wasn't certain about that.
Ms. Gaddy, do you know if anyone took up Mr. Chan's offer to hand out security clearances 30 days before the 2020 election?
Not that I'm aware.
So the FBI didn't tell you that it was fake, didn't tell you that it was hacked. And Mr. Roth, did the story violate your policies?
In my judgment at the time, no, it did not.
Yeah, that's what you said. Said what I would propose, is you said it isn't clearly a violation of our hack materials policy, nor is it clearly a violation of anything else. So I think what a lot of people are wondering is if it didn't violate your policies and they didn't tell you it was fake, didn't tell you it was hacked, why'd you take it down?
The company made a decision that found that it did violate the policy. It wasn't my personal judgment at the time that it did, but the decision was communicated to me by my direct supervisor, and ultimately I didn't disagree with it enough to object to
You know what I think happened, Mr. Roth? I think you guys got played. I think you guys wanted to take it deep down. We saw what the chairman put up where you said, everyone in the White House is a fascist. I think you guys wanted it to be taken down. I think you meet with these guys every week. We know that's been established in the Twitter files. You had weekly meetings with Mr. Chan in the run-up to the election. They send you all kinds of emails. They send you documents on the super secret James Bond teleporter. You get information on that. I think you guys wanted to take it down. I think you guys got played by the FBI. And that's the scary part. Because we had 50, this to me is the real takeaway. 51 former intelligence officials 5 days after you guys take down the Hunter Biden story and block the New York Post account. 5 days later, 51 former intel officials send a letter and they say, the Hunter Biden story has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. The information operation was run on you guys, and then by extension run on the American people. And that's the concern. But your terms of service don't have to comply with the First Amendment. Would that be right, Mr. Roth? They don't have to. You've said that as much in your testimony.
My understanding of the First Amendment is that it protects people and businesses from government, not
Understand
informs how the...
in your terms of service. So here's what I want to know. Here's what I want to know. Is this a violation of the First Amendment when the government, Mr. Chan, again, sending you an email saying, we think these accounts need to be looked at because they violate your terms of service? That's a different standard. So you got the government saying your terms of service, which don't have to comply with the First Amendment, but the government saying we don't think these accounts comply with your terms of service, please take them down. You see a problem there, Mr. Roth? So the user knows when their account's been suspended or blocked, but they don't know when they have some of these gold terms that were under Mr. Bongino and Mr. Kirk. Is that right, Mr. Roth?
As of the time that I worked at Twitter, yes, that's correct.
So they don't know if they're on the search blacklist. They don't know if they're on the do not amplify. They don't know that.
That's correct. Twitter did not disclose that.
So you did that to these two accounts. What I want to know did you know, Mr. Roth, if that was at the prompting of anyone from the government?
Gentleman's time's expired, but please answer the question.
No, sir, I'm not aware of any requests or orders or demands or anything from the government requesting that visibility filtering be applied to those accounts or any others.
Best of my recollection, I did not talk to the FBI about the Hunter Biden story before that day.
Did you talk to him after it? You said your response is real. Your response is real specific to the chairman. You said, I did not talk to the FBI about the Hunter Biden laptop story that day. I assume that day is October 14th. I want to know if you talked to him on the 13th or before, or if you talked to him on the 15th and after.
I don't recall speaking to the FBI. Sitting here today, I don't recall speaking to the FBI at all about the Hunter Biden matter.
Well, then why'd you answer it the way you did? You know who knew the laptop was real was the FBI. They had it for, or maybe they had it for a year and just said, you know what, we're going to put it on the shelf, we're not going to look at it. But if anyone knew it was real, it's them. That's why I asked the question, again, back to my colleague from New York, what he was talking about. That's why I asked the question earlier. I said, did anyone at the FBI or Mr. Baker know, did Mr. Baker talk to any of those 51 former intel officials who sent the letters saying this has all the classic earmarks of a Russian misinformation operation? Maybe they could have checked with the FBI because the FBI had the actual laptop in their possession.
Mr. Roth, you enjoyed these meetings with the FBI, it seems, based on the tweets behind me or the communications behind me. In internal communications at Twitter, you said definitely not meeting with the FBI, I swear. Is that correct?
I believe I was joking with a colleague at the time, but yes.
But I can assume that you were meeting with the FBI when you were communicating with your colleague. Is that correct?
Yes, one of my job responsibilities was meeting with law enforcement about election security.
And just so I'm clear, the person you're communicating with here says, very boring business meeting that is definitely not about Trump. I assume that's also sarcasm.
Yes, that's my assumption.
And we can assume that Twitter was having these meetings with the FBI about President Trump, correct?
No, sir. The meetings that I was a part of with the FBI were almost entirely and exclusively focused on malign foreign interference, so accounts being operated outside of the United States by other governments, not on the accounts of Americans.
So what is the basis of this communication then where you talk about not meeting with Trump or not meeting about Trump?
Again, I think those comments are sarcasm, but the context for this interaction was the need to mark my calendar private after another Twitter employee joined one of those meetings with the FBI unexpectedly. And so I had to implement additional security measures around my calendar. This was a fairly banal interaction with a colleague.
By Princeton University called Powered by Twitter, the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan.
Without objection, so ordered.
This study covers the time frame of April to September of 2021, which is 4 to 5 month period between President Biden's official announcement of America's intentions to withdraw and the chaotic end of the American troop presence in Afghanistan. The study found that the Taliban weapon policies failed. There were more than 126,000 accounts in the Taliban support network, and 83% of these Taliban-associated accounts were created before 2021, well before Twitter could claim that these accounts represented a government. These accounts shared graphic images and videos depicting dead and decomposing bodies and rampantly spread disinformation about the facts on the ground in direct violation of Twitter's public policies. Taliban tweets were shared millions of times in the summer of 2020. The study also found that 3/4 of Taliban content was produced by only 20 accounts, which is suggestively straightforward. By the way, the U.S. government classifies the Taliban as an insurgent group. And by the way, they carried out multiple suicide attacks during the time frame they were sending out these tweets, killing dozens and injuring hundreds.
It's my understanding that Twitter's policies at the time distinguished between some of the more violent portions of the Taliban and some of the more political portions of it. I'm not rendering judgment on it.
That stuff's still up on Twitter, and I just wonder how many content moderators were assigned, if any, to check on these accounts. Additionally, it appears that Twitter was profiting from Taliban's presence on the platform in the lead up to the overthrow of the Afghan government. Twitter placed ads from U.S. companies, including Amazon, Disney, McDonald's, and on the Twitter accounts of the Taliban news organization and their spokespersons and their senior leaders. Ms. Gaddy, did Twitter make money off placed ads on Taliban Twitter accounts on August 26, 2021, when 13 U.S. men and women died in a suicide bombing?
I have no knowledge of this matter.
On June 3rd, 2018, the Iranian Ayatollah Khomeini.
Now, did Twitter do that?
Sounds like the Green New Deal to me.
Never had this happen with the electricity went out. but the computer is flickering, but the C-SPAN is working, so we're being recorded again as according to the rules.
According to Twitter, the decision to ban President Trump was after a close review of his tweets and the context around them, specifically how they are being received and interpreted on and off Twitter. On June 3rd, 2018, the Iranian Ayatollah Khomeini tweeted, "Israel is a malignant, cancerous tumor in the West Asian region and has to be removed and eradicated. It is possible and it will happen." This tweet remains on Twitter to this day. Mr. Roth, how do you believe this tweet from the leader of Iran calling for the eradication of Israel was received and interpreted on and off Twitter?
I couldn't say for sure how that tweet was interpreted.
Why does the Iranian leader who has explicitly pledged to eradicate the Jewish state of Israel get to remain on Twitter?
Like all of Twitter's users, the Ayatollah is subject to the same set of rules. And while I can't speak for Twitter's decisions today, I can say that Twitter took a number of enforcement actions against the Ayatollah's account, the same way that we would against
That's still up. You understand how hypocritical this is, right? You banned a sitting U.S. president and a sitting member of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, while a man who has pledged death to America and can openly call for the death of millions of Jewish people and yet not be removed from Twitter. Do you understand how that looks?
Mr. Roth, my question to you is, when 51 intelligence officials told us that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, the Democrats, the mainstream media, the president, all repeated this lie. Now that you know what you know years later, do you still believe that the Hunter Biden laptop is not real, or do you believe it's real?
Sir, I never held that belief.
Do you believe that the story is Russian disinformation?
No, sir. I didn't then, and I don't now.
Okay. I have a question for Mr. Baker. You started your role as Twitter's deputy general counsel in June of 2020, correct?
Yes, sir.
Who hired you for that role?
Who specifically hired me? My boss was a person named Sean Edgett, who was the general counsel.
Sean Edgen?
Edgett.
Edgett.
E-G-E-T-T.
And that's who you interviewed with?
I interviewed with numerous people, but Sean was my boss.
Anyone that comes to mind outside of Sean?
Ms. Gotti I interviewed with. You're saying other people that I interviewed with at Twitter?
But ultimately, the hiring agent was Sean Edgen.
I'm not sure exactly who made the decision, to be frank with you, but Sean was my boss.
Okay. My next question is, when you were fired from Twitter in December of 2022, after the release of the first installment of the Twitter files, did you destroy any internal communications related to that first batch of the Twitter files?
As I said in my testimony, I didn't destroy any documents, period.
Back to Mr. Roth. Is it true that Twitter whitelisted accounts for the Department of Defense to spread propaganda about its efforts in the Middle East? Did they give you a list of accounts that were fake accounts and asked you to whitelist those accounts?
That request was made of Twitter. To be clear, when I found out about that activity, I was appalled by it. I undid the action, and my team exposed activity originating from the Department of Defense's campaign publicly. We've shared that data with the world, and research about it has been published.
Was that only in efforts against foreign entities, or were there any efforts against citizens of the United States?
I think the nature of public social media activity means that anybody might have seen it, but my understanding was the activity was predominantly focused outside of the United States.
Mr. Matt Taibbi, a respected reporter who published much of the Twitter files, said, quote, "Twitter's contact with FBI was constant and pervasive, as if it were a subsidiary." Now, I want to better understand why he would suggest that. Mr. Roth, while at Twitter, how many meetings did you have with the FBI?
I couldn't say for sure, but I would
More
say
than 10?
That's a
More than
reasonable
20?
estimate. I couldn't say for sure.
More than 50?
That seems a bit high.
Many meetings with the FBI. Well, We know how many FBI agents worked at Twitter while you were there?
I don't believe any active FBI agents.
Former FBI agents. How many worked there while you were there?
I'm aware of perhaps 2.
Well, we know of at least 9 because they started the BU group chat, BU for Bureau. Now, Mr. Roth, did the FBI ever ask you to share information like users' communication data without going through proper legal channels?
No, they did not, and I would have refused if they had.
That's correct. I see that you denied Agent Chan's request for access to Twitter's data feed. What's sick isn't that you would deny it, it's that the FBI would even ask you for the private data of American citizens without going through legal channels of the law. Now, I want to remind you, Mr. Roth, that you are under oath. Did the FBI ever ask you to do anything that was illegal or questionably legal?
I'm not a lawyer, but certainly not to the best of my recollection or knowledge.
From the hearing that I've been a part of today, it's almost impossible to tell where the FBI ends and where Twitter begins. We have Mr. Baker here, a former FBI agent, and there seems to be a revolving door between the FBI and Twitter itself. Even Mr. Baker said that there was no collusion with the federal government and Twitter. But Mr. Baker, that's you. You are the collusion. Election interference? Yeah, I would say that that was taking place because of you 4 sitting here. The Hunter Biden laptop story was suppressed. A sitting member of Congress was suppressed. A sitting president was banned. We've heard about threats to democracy. Well, what about shutting down a duly elected member of Congress? This is fundamental to our nation's governance, and you all attacked that very foundation. 230 protections? Well, those are for publishers, not for editors. And it's clear you were not acting as publishers, you were acting as editors. And Mr. Chairman, I think it's far past time that we remove 230 protections for big tech platforms who are abusing this protection. And let me just say, I'm not angry for myself. I'm not angry because I was silenced. And I can sit here today and hold you all in account. I am angry for the millions of Americans who were silenced because of your decisions, because of your actions, because of your collusion with the federal government. They can't reach out to Elon. They can't sit here today and hold you into account. We don't know where the FBI ends and Twitter begins.
For Mr. Roth, in September 2020, a few weeks before the New York Post published the first story on the Hunter Biden trading on his name, you participated in an exercise hosted by the Aspen Institute with other media outlets, social media companies, and national security reporters. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I did.
And Mr. Roth, that event was hosted specifically by the Aspen Digital Hack and Dump Working Group. Is that correct?
I know it was hosted by the Aspen Institute. I couldn't say who specifically within that.
Mr. Roth, this event was before the release of the Hunter Biden laptop story, correct?
That's my recollection, yes.
And during that event, a scenario that was discussed was a hypothetical October 2020 release of records related to Hunter Biden. Is that correct?
Again, that's my recollection of the event, yes.
And Mr. Roth, did you participate in the design of this hypothetical scenario?
Not to the best of my recollection, no.
Are you telling me that you never had any conversation with anyone regarding the contents of this scenario?
No, sir, I didn't say that. I met with the Aspen Institute on a number of occasions. I wouldn't say that I was involved in the development of the scenario in a specific way, no.
So you're telling me that I will find no witnesses that would testify they had conversation with you regarding the development of this scenario?
I genuinely could not say what other witnesses might or might not say.
Mr. Roth, I'd like to point you to a sworn statement that you previously made. You've given a sworn declaration stating that federal law enforcement agencies communicated that they expected hack and leak operations by state actors might occur in the period shortly before the 2020 presidential election, likely in October. Is this your statement?
Yes, it was.
And Mr. Roth, you said since 2018 you had been meeting with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and industry peers regarding election security, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Roth, you were told there would likely be a hack and leak operation occurring in October. Is that correct?
I believe the FBI has objected to the word likely or expected, but we certainly discussed that possibility with them.
Earlier today, you testified that you were following national experts on Twitter, national security experts on Twitter, as a reason to take down the New York Post story on Hunter Biden's laptop.
Yes, sir, I did.
So after 2016, you set up all these teams to deal with Russian interference, foreign interference. You're having regular meetings with the FBI. You have connections with all of these different government agencies, and you didn't reach out to them once?
Is that question in reference to the day of the New York Post
Yeah.
article? That's right. We generally did not reach out to the FBI to consult on content moderation decisions, especially where they related to domestic activity. It's not that we wouldn't have liked that information. We certainly would have. It's that I don't believe it would have been appropriate for us to consult with the FBI.
In December of 2020, you did a declaration to the Federal Election Commission that the intelligence community expected a leak and a hack operation involving Hunter Biden. Recently, Mark Zuckerberg confirmed that the FBI warned Meta that there was a high effort of Russian propaganda, including language specific enough to fit the Hunter laptop Biden security story. You're talking to these people for weeks and months, years prior to this leaking. They have specifically told you in October that there's going to be a leak potentially involving Hunter Biden's laptop. They legitimately and literally prophesized what happened. And you didn't contact any of them?
No, sir, I did not.
Did they reach out to you?
On and around that day, to the best of my recollection, no, they did not.
So after the story was taken down and you guys did it and you personally disagreed with it, Ms. Gaddy, you said you did. Did you contact them and say, hey, is this what you were talking about?
Brief closing statements. I yield to the ranking member.
Well, thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for your endurance and patience today. I hope you don't feel as bad about the day as you seem to look right now, but it's going to be over soon. I want to start with a simple point that I hope will be sympathetic to you, and I began the long day with this.
It's even more important now that we have members who are actually threatening witnesses with arrest and prosecution for clearly imaginary offenses, or at least offenses that might make sense in their minds, but I don't quite know what they would be. But Twitter is a private First Amendment protected media entity. And you make your own decisions like Fox News makes its decisions. And I might get kicked off of Fox News, or they might not cover me, or Wall Street Journal, or MSNBC. I've got no constitutional right to go there. So I think there's just a fundamental legal fallacy and logical fallacy that pervades most of the questioning today. And my friend, the chairman, and my friend, Mr. Jordan, certainly know that under our First Amendment, there's a state action requirement. There is no state action here. Now, there's an attempt to perhaps jerry-rig some state action by claiming, well, it was really the FBI that committed whatever offense was there. But what do we have in terms of what we found today? Well, today's witnesses, each and every one testified that no U.S. government official directed any of them to censor, remove, or take down the New York Post story. That was their mistake. 2, today's witnesses all testified that the Biden campaign did not direct Twitter to take action against the New York Post story. And 3, the whole hearing was predicated on the idea that the FBI directed Twitter to take down the New York Post story to protect Biden, but once again, not a single witness testified that the FBI even communicated with Twitter about the New York Post story. So to me, this has been a wild cyber goose chase all day. It has turned up absolutely nothing, but there was one serious point made by our witness, Ms. Navaroli, who said that the violence and the chaos that was wreaked upon this institution, not far from where we sit today, on January 6th, the attempt to topple a presidential election and install someone who had not been elected as president, was facilitated by Twitter and other
Gentleman yields back. I will conclude by reminding my friend, the ranking member, that you've gone through quite the transition at the beginning of the hearing. You, as well as many of your colleagues, said this was a conspiracy theory. After listening to the witnesses, now you say it's a simple mistake they made in suppressing the laptop story. Twitter is a private company, but they enjoy special liability protection, Section 230. They also, according to Twitter files, receive millions of dollars from the FBI, which is tax dollars, I would assume. And that makes it a concern of the Oversight Committee. The reason that we've had this hearing is because the laptop has been mislabeled by many in the mainstream media as being Russian disinformation, and that started with Twitter, as well as being tampered with, and you had several people, including Mr. Goldman, that implied that it had been tampered with, even though CBS News and other credible media outlets.
You mean mainstream media outlets?
CBS?
Yeah.
You don't think CBS is credible?
No, I thought you were just calling them mainstream media.
No.
Okay.
CBS News. CBS News has done a forensic audit, that shows that the hard drive is legitimate and it was not tampered with. So these are misconceptions that are out there, and they started because of the suppression of the laptop story. The reason the laptop's important is because there's evidence on there that should concern every American about potential corruption, as well as evidence that would suggest that there's a possibility that this administration could be compromised because of the millions and millions of dollars that they've received from our adversaries around the world. That much of that evidence is contained in the laptop. So I think this was a very successful hearing. I appreciate the witnesses' time. I know it was a very long day, and again, we've never had the electricity go out before. But again, we appreciate your sincere testimony.
Talking about Hunter Biden's half-fake laptop story. I mean, this is an embarrassment.
Fake. Greg, you were talking in the green room about this story. Do you want to elaborate?
The strategy here with these folks is to admit that they screwed up because it doesn't matter. They won, right? They could say, yeah, you know, we screwed up, you know, we shouldn't have done that. But they're kind of at the same time admitting they got away with it and they can't arrest them. You can't do anything about it. They did censor material. I know that people say private companies can't do that, but when the government colludes as part of a cabal, which they called it, to vanish actual news to affect an election, that is censorship. And they weren't played by the FBI. They were playing with the FBI.
And we already know from the numbers that but for the suppression of this laptop, a lot of people might have voted differently. And I also think that it's important to note that when you've got an FBI that is reaching out to social media companies and saying, be on the lookout for a leaked Russian disinformation on a laptop, and then you've got the FBI lying to a FISA court, and then you've got, all kinds of agencies getting involved, like even with the balloon saying, we didn't tell the president for a bunch of days. You start to wonder who's running the country. Is the president running the country, or are these agencies running the country?
Well, I would ask this. I mean, what is the Democrats' strategy? Because if Twitter is there and saying, yeah, you know what, you're right, we're caught, you caught us, then why are the Democrats then all saying that this hearing is baloney? The hearing just accomplished what they set out to do. And I also, here's my question, where is Jack Dorsey? How does he get away with not having to come and testify? He was the CEO. He was the leader, and all of a sudden, only these guys have to come? And the other thing is that AOC may have missed it last week, but even Hunter's lawyers are saying that that is his laptop, not even half laptop.
We have evidence that other social media companies were involved as well in this chat thread. If you guys can get the graphic that I posted from my @RepAPL account, it actually shows that under DHS, there's an organization called CISA. They're the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and they really were the ones that set up the misinformation, disinformation boards. They were actually working to communicate with these social media platforms on a private cloud server called Jira, as well as the Center for Internet Security, different supervisor boards around the state for secretaries of state, and then all of these very left-leaning fact-checking organizations and private partnerships. So this is what we know as a joint state actor. And the fact is that they did not expect us to have the screenshot of their conversation. But to be clear, that screenshot represents one of thousands. And it was actually leaked, I think, on accident by Alex Samus on a YouTube video from Stanford University. And so that was the smoking gun. I think that there needs to be a lot more investigations into this. And as we're seeing, there was absolute collusion with these companies and the federal government to suppress the First Amendment. So we also found out from a final report by the Election Integrity Partnership that the DNC was potentially involved in this. And so clearly this is going to be something that as oversight, we have to do a lot more investigating and looking into. But what this establishes right now is that this is a joint state action with the federal government and these private companies to work to suppress the American people. And mind you, they were doing this in secret. They knew darn well what they were doing was illegal. And I think the fact that the DNC went to really bat for them and protect them just goes to show how deep this really went. But from a legal perspective, what this allows people to do is I think it opens up these people for lawsuits. I believe that they were lying to me. Yoel Roth was definitely lying to me, and he tried to hide the facts. He didn't anticipate that we would have him literally in a screenshot with CISA and Twitter as an executive and other agencies. And so the fact is that if they can lie to a member of Congress, we have to make sure that we're holding them accountable. If the National Archives went after President Trump because they're saying that he didn't properly store classified information, and yet you have an entire governmental agency that's privately talking on a server and definitely not storing any of the information, I mean, do you see the double standard that exists? And so right now, what we're doing is not only working to expose this, but also we have to write legislation to ensure that this never happens again.